Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. It's great to see you.
100% wonderful. So we're actually in the middle of the stories of Jairus' daughter and a woman of faith. We haven't talked yet about why there are two stories that seem to be commingled. We'll speak of that in the future. We're actually going to do the part B story. We have an A story, and then we have a first story, and then a second story. Then we go back to the end of the first story. So we still haven't finished the first story, but it's not our fault. When Matthew wrote the story, he knew that we're going to have it cut off and have the story in the middle. So we're only going to focus on that story in the middle today. So we're going to read Matthew 9:20 to 22. And while you could argue like we shouldn't care about why it's in between, it really is somewhat an independent story from what's happening in 9:18 to and 9:19, and then starting in 9:23. So we're just going to read 9:20 to 9:22. Those three verses there.
Well, on that note, I also want to say, right, the previous conversation on number 12 was very enlightening, as the number 12
Okay.
is baked into every part. Again, it's so deep, it's part of the fabric of living. Calendar, Jacob having to can only have 12 sons, and time, and so some of these nuances where she was 12 years, the girl was 12 years old, blood hemorrhage for 12 years. Thank you for highlighting all those again. The meaning of number 12.
Okay. Good to go. I'm sorry the next verse is not 12, but we'll go with that.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 9, verse 20 onwards. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, if I only touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well.
Okay, I'd have to
And
imagine the story is not as famous in the church because the church probably, while it loves blood in concept, it doesn't love blood in practice as much. And this story seems to be more focused on blood. Am I right to say that this is not such a famous story?
I think so in this case, right? The servants have been the context of her faith that she touched the fringe of his garment, and and because of that she was made whole. It's again, it's always been on her, or the focus was that she had faith and she touched the fringe of his garment to say that like she had reached the end of herself, like she didn't have any other option, right? And so um, and that Jesus was able to he noticed that something happened, that power went outside of him, or it's like something happened, right? So
So
that's
let's first start by maybe talking about what are some of the things that come up that are surprising in this. So I think you just mentioned that you said she had no other choice. So I assume you saying that because if she had been unwell for 12 years and it had not been that she is healed, she feels she has no choice. Is that sound about accurate?
Yeah, I think when I mean no choice, she's probably gone to multiple medical doctors, and like nothing has worked out so far, right? And so, and medical can also be expensive. It's I don't think it was any less expensive back then. And so, like she had tried everything she can do within for the last 12 years. So that's
Okay.
kind of what that's
So
kind of
so
what I
one
meant.
so
But
one question we have that is it's not a question, just an observation that you want to say that she felt why did she go to Jesus? Because she felt she had no other options. That totally makes sense, right? But I feel then when we look at some other points in the verse, it says, then suddenly a woman had been suffering from the blood for 12 years, came up behind him and touched the fringe. And it said he didn't see her. So it sounds like to me she's coming secretly, right? She came up behind him, she came suddenly, she said to herself, and then Jesus turned and then saw her. So if you wanted to be healed by Jesus, why would you come secretly? So one option she's coming secretly is because she didn't know Jesus and she didn't know how what a nice guy he is and that he's willing to do miracles left and right. And she was worried that he wouldn't do that. But maybe when he saw her face or her issue, that she would be healed by him or it would have a chance. But it
yeah,
seems to
and I
be
think
that she
yeah.
didn't believe naturally she was going to get access to him.
Well, I think to be fair, she would have been embarrassed. Like, would she come and say, like, if she were again, if it's a blind man, he can say, "Lord, heal me." And maybe this was her way of viewing as in it's too embarrassing to identify to kind of share what I'm going through or publicly share about
But
this.
she never
Uh,
shares that though.
yeah,
She just says,
so
I'm Seal. So I'm not sure if I think it is embarrassing what you're saying, and she may not want to share that. But I think that wouldn't explain the situation because she never shares it. All she says is that I need to be healed. So if that's all she ever shares, then her sneaking up on him is not. explained by her being embarrassed.
Yeah, so if I touch his garment, I will be made well, right? So that's the way of thinking. So I think, so when we say she kind of snuck up on him, right? I would imagine that there was so much of crowds surrounding him, people wanting to be healed.
Well, don't
Uh,
forget where is he right now? Don't forget what happened in 9:19. Jesus got up and followed. They all went to the leader of the synagogue's house where his daughter is.
mhm.
So they're in the house right now. That's the simple read right now. But the point is, like, I think you see that she was acting somehow surreptitiously. She thought that for some reason, we don't know why, it's not going to work unless she does this sneaky thing. And then he actually goes and sees her and says, you never even have to do that. Don't worry about it. So we have to try to understand what's happening right there. Next thing is, if you believe Jesus is a miracle worker, there's different ways that miracles could happen. But it sounds like she seems to be the one who's in charge. She goes, I got a plan. I'm sick for 12 years. I got these blood issues. I'm going to touch his cloak and then I'm going to be healed. Is that how the magic works? Is that how the miracle works? Isaac, have you ever thought that I'm unwell? I'm going to go to a miracle worker. I'm going to touch his cloak. So the idea that she's going to touch his cloak seems to be very surprising. Uh,
See, I don't find any surprising at all, right? I mean, so she had so much of faith, right? So
if
if
she
this is
had faith, she could have just gone up to him and asked.
yeah, I mean, I think Rabbi, I think I would say like that if she felt shameful, didn't quite know how to explain her thing. But the fact that she touched him, that to me symbolizes faith, as in she viewed him at that high level that everything he touches is holy, right? And so,
So,
uh,
so I do agree with you. So I will note, I wasn't going to go into, there's a commandment, one of the 613 commandments according to Rabbinic Judaism is the tzitzit, the fringes that Jews wear on the end of their talit, their prayer shawls. And it does look like she touched the fringe of his cloak. And if he was a rabbinic or a sectarian Jew, he still would have read in the Bible that he's supposed to wear these strings. So it does seem that she would have touched either the strings, or another way to say this, the very end. She wasn't trying to get too close. So I feel like we're not going to agree completely. I feel that she feels uneven. She feels there's some magic in touching, which we agree on. There's some magic in touching, but she doesn't really know how it works. And she says that if only I touch his cloak, I'll be made well. If I only connect with this guy, somehow it'll work. So it's unclear. Why doesn't she just ask him? Which she does, by the way. He turns around and he says to her, take heart, my daughter, your faith has made you well. Your magic that you thought it works this way, it doesn't work this way. All you have to do is believe or have faith or whatever that means, and you're set. So it seems like there's a hiddenness and then a misunderstanding on her part that Jesus, because he's such a great guy, said, don't worry about it. It's all good. So it's the same ending. It's hard to understand what she's trying to accomplish and what is actually happening. So and I'll be honest, even when you look at his answer, the one thing that kind of stands out to me, this very much feels like it parallels the centurion's servant answer. In 8:13, it says, go there, go take care of it, but by faith, by your actions, by what you do, you'll be healed. And I think this is a common theme we keep seeing, that it doesn't seem that Jesus is willing to just touch you and do magic in general. It seems Jesus wants you to kind of meet him in the middle a little bit. He wants you to have faith, and your faith will be the thing that heals. I think when anyone reads this verse, and I've noted this to you in the past, when you read this verse, did Jesus heal her or does her faith heal? And that might be the same thing for you. I get that. But when you read this, it's not that Jesus healed her, right? It's that Jesus says, you don't even need me to do nothing.
yeah,
All you
it's
need is to know that if you have faith, you'll be healed.
and so Rabbi, when you say faith, it's just not the mental
No,
believing,
I think faith in
but
Jesus.
yeah, yeah, no, yeah. So when you say faith in Jesus, then it's not that she just mentally cognitively believed this thing, but she also, from that belief, did the physical act of touching the fringe of his garment.
No,
So,
she did that. No. That's not what it says. You're going out of order. She touched it, and then he says, he turned when he saw her touch it, and he said, take heart, though, your faith has made you well. AKA, the touching did nothing. Your faith is what matters, and the touching is subordinate. And
so,
instantly the woman was made well.
is a touching an act of faith? As in, when you say
Oh,
faith,
yes, 100%. But what we see is that he doesn't say because you touched, that was an act. He just says, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. So
yeah.
you're
So
saying it's identical, and I hear I think that Jesus seems to always want a partner, and you're saying maybe it has to be an action. I think maybe it just has to be a thought, but I think we're somewhat on the same page with these questions. And then when you look at the centurion servant,
So if all she needed was just a thought, right, she wouldn't have to come all the way till here. She could have just been at home and just
and
thought.
first of all, so you might be right, but she didn't know that. The whole point of the story is that she doesn't know how to get healed. She never knew. She knew that Jesus is able to do some stuff. Okay. So so again, and I want to point out just with the centurion servant, when we look at in 8:13, it says, and to the centurion, Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you according to your faith." And the servant was healed in that hour. So again, I would say it's not ambiguous. He doesn't really have to do any additional action from my perspective. He just has to have a certain level of belief and faith in Jesus and whatever that means, in some kingdom of heaven, some messianic whole, and then it will be healed. Okay. So we have some questions about that on the table. What's she thinking? Does she really need to do that? Is Jesus really solving that? So in order to solve some of these questions, I want to first point out that there are a lot of other biblical examples of people going to a quote a healer and reaching out and hoping to get healed at some level. So the first example I want to check, if you have a Bible in front of you, that's
Yeah.
fine. If not, I'll just read it to you. But in 1 Samuel 24, in 1 Samuel 24, it says very famously, I'll read you the first three verses, but even though the most important one is the fourth one I'm about to read. Samuel 1:24, chapter 24, it says in verse 1, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En Gedi, not far away. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all of Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats in order to kill him. Saul wanted to kill David. In verse 3, it now says, he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. He did not know, Saul, that David and his men were far back hiding in that cave. What bad luck for Saul. He has to go to the bathroom. He sees a cave. He wants to be private. And all the people he's searching to kill, he goes in privately and he's in danger. David's men said in verse 4, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. How lucky, they're saying. Saul wants to kill you. You could kill Saul without anyone even noting. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robes. In verse 5, it continues, afterward, David was conscience stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, and he was very unhappy. He didn't know how to treat Saul. But the point of this is that when you look at the corner of the robe, David cuts off Saul to show that I am so intimate with you. I'm so close to you. You are in such mortal danger that we can have a relationship without you even knowing. And this is exactly what the young woman is doing in our verse. She's saying that the fact that I could touch your cloak means that we're intimate, means that we can have a relationship. You, Jesus, may not even know that we have a relationship yet, but the fact that I could come here and touch this, that shows how close we are, that we see from that story of David. Okay, so that's one thing I want you. So that's not a story. Would you like to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So the topic of Saul and David, right? How much of that is just it's warfare, right? They were fighting, they were doing. It's a moment of Saul's weakness, and David was able to,
Yeah, but
you know,
I'm just trying to point out that he could have done a million things. He cuts off the corner of his cloak to show that I have complete access to you. I could have done anything I wanted. And I'm showing that with her, not that this woman wanted to injure Jesus, heaven forbid. I just want to show that she felt that specific geographical closeness in order to carry out her will, which in this case was to grab onto the fringes of his cloak. Okay, so yes, but it's definitely not warfare. So in the next verse I want you to see is in 2 Kings chapter 4, the very famous story where the Shunammite woman who took care of Elisha for many days, and she doesn't have a baby. Eventually, Elisha says, "You're gonna have a baby," and she says, "I'll only have a baby if you promise he'll do well." Unfortunately, that baby dies, or as an adult, that child dies, and she goes and brings the corpse to Elisha. And what we see in, again, this is chapter 4 and verse 28. We'll start. Did I ask you for a son, my lord? She says. Didn't I tell you I don't want a son? Don't raise my hopes unless he's going to be okay. So she was old. She didn't think she'd have a child. Her husband was even older, but he has a child. And then God or Elisha allows him to die. Unacceptable. So we see in verse 29, Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. Don't greet anyone you meet, and if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. So we see that Elisha is willing to take care of that. But right before this whole story takes place, what we see is that in verse 27, I wanted to start with the ending, but in verse 27, we have almost a throwaway verse. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, Elisha, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is bitter and distressed, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. I didn't know the baby's going to be dead. So we see when a woman is in distress, a lot of times she'll grab for the feet, or a person when they're supposed to grab for grab for the cloak. If anything, it's viewed as almost like an extremity. It's a part of you that's somewhat external to you, but close to you. We see that this woman in the story in Matthew, is kind of on the fringe. She's grabbing the cloak. She's trying to get intimate with him. She's trying to have a relationship with him. But she also knows that it's a question, it's a hope, it's just wanting a miracle. So we see from these two biblical examples that she was someone who's trying to access him, and she does not know his response. Okay,
Mhm.
so that just further set the groundwork. So what I want to do next is show you that what I think of the most important word is this is a word that's mistranslated in mine. So when you actually your Bible that you read perfectly, but when I read verse 20, this is how my verse 20 says. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. So you actually said blood flow. I believe that's the word that you said.
Yeah,
So so I
discharge of blood.
when I looked at the word hemorrhages, when I think of hemorrhages, I always think of brain injury or shaking. But what's interesting is that I couldn't understand how come some of them say blood flow and some of them say hemorrhages. So when you look actually in the original Greek, what we find is that it's very clear. The word that it uses is aṃmorroοῦσα. Aṃmorroοῦsa is made up of two words, ama, which means blood, and the second one is a flow, a flood. So if I asked you, Jesus, now, if I asked you, what was Jesus dealing with? Isaac, if I ask you, what is the issue that she has? What is the ailment she has? Describe it for me in 20 words less. What's her ailment? Because when it was hemorrhages, I knew what it was. What do you think New Testament is trying to teach us? What is Matthew telling us is her ailment? And I want to point out the word haima only shows up this one time in the whole New Testament. So we can't do like a comparative study about what blood flow means.
Yeah, so it's not a hemorrhage in the sense. I think she was having issues with, with again with the menstrual cycle, with bleeding, and so that's one way. That's been some of the, again, I think
Okay, so
that's,
you want to say that she's having menstrual cycle issues. She's bleeding vaginally, and that is an issue that she couldn't control. And if you understand how biblical and rabbinic Judaism works, that a woman who is menstruating has to separate from her husband and separate from other things. A woman who continually menstruates, even though this wouldn't be real menstruation, this would be a woman who's having an ailment. A woman who continues that, A, won't be able to get married because she won't be able to keep those days of separation. B, she's not going to have a normal life. She's not going to be
Mhm.
able to function. She always has to worry about bleeding. So I want to now show you two verses from the Pentateuch that say, I think, have an attitude about what does it mean to have like a blood life situation. So one of the verses in Numbers chapter 31, verse 19, if you want to look it up, it says that when the Israelites went to war against the Midianites, and they also killed Bilam at this because of the advice that Bilam gave. It says in verse 19, all of you who have killed anyone or touched anyone who was killed must stay outside the camp 7 days. On the third and seventh day, you must purify yourself by sprinkling some waters on you and your captives. Purify every garment as well as everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. So what we see is that when a person touches another person who is exposed to what we call the impurity of death, they have to be purified. Their clothes have to be purified. And also, they can't really be part of the congregation until that happens. So one other verse I want to show you, which is the source for these rules a lot of times, is Leviticus 15:19 and 15:24. In Leviticus 15:19, it says, whenever a woman has her menstrual period, she will be ceremonially unclean. She'll be impure for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during that time will be unclean until evening. And then it goes on. If a man has sexual intercourse with her and her blood touches him, then he will also be unclean. So what we see from Leviticus 15:19 and 15:24 is that not only is it that in Numbers, if you touch a dead body or dealt with that, do your clothes and yourself have to be made pure because they are impure for a certain amount of time. We see from Leviticus 15:19, when a woman has blood on her, she makes those around her possibly impure. It could be when, according to certain reads, it could be when she walks into the house. It could be when she sits down. It could be when she touches something. So now I want to add a Jewish element to this Matthew story, Isaac, which I'm sure you never thought about. Now we both agree that she's dealing with some blood issue. That's the right interpretation. It literally has huma, the word that we see for humans, blood comes from this. So she is a person who, when she touches other people's clothing, she makes that person impure. That's
Mhm.
what we just found out from Leviticus 15:19. And again, there's different interpretations about if she touches, how she touches. But I think it's very clear from this story. We have an impure person going to make a prophet, a miracle worker, a healer, a person who's becoming famous, also impure. The best explanation of her touching the hem of the fringe of the cloak is because she wants to get his attention, but by being aware that she will also make him impure. So what's she thinking, Isaac?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in that case, right? So the fact that she's been in the crowd, that people she's touched people, you can't just walk the crowd without touching people. And so people have been made impure along the way. Like the fact by the time she reached,
Well,
by
she
the
could
time,
avoid people. She could avoid people.
yeah, but
This is the only person that she's actively making impure.
yeah. So I think in some ways, and it speaks to her faith, right? When he says faith, like she believes that she can still touch him and she will not make him impure, but by touch by
Why do you
that.
think I'm saying she knows she's going to make him impure. I'm saying the opposite. Why would
Hmm.
she know she's not going to make him impure? The opposite. She would know
Yeah,
that she's going to make him impure.
but she still believes that by touching his garment, what she said to herself,
She has a reason for it. It could be the reason that we just said it from because in 1 Samuel and 2 Kings we see that this is how you interface with people that you need. But what's interesting, I think, is that we see that she had it for 12 years. And a person who had it for 12 years, in Jewish tradition, a lot of times a 12-year-old woman is an adult. So it could be either she's 12 years old and she had it from birth, or it could be that she started menstruating when she was 12 and now she's 24. And she had it for a whole adult life cycle for a
Mhm.
baby until a woman becomes a woman and is able to now carry and give birth. And I think what we would have seen is that she would have been forced to kind of live an isolated lifestyle because of this bleeding. She would not be able to get married. And I think one thing she's doing is she's sharing that pain. She's saying, like, I'm impure, and this new leader, this new miracle worker, this new healer who's on the scene, I want to also make him impure because I want him to experience what I'm experiencing. I want him to see that myself who's invisible in society, who can't be seen, and I want to share that. When she says to him that I am unwell, it would have been again like there's different kinds of sickness, but that would have been like because I'm unwell, I'm spreading that, I'm sharing that. We do know that the main way, even today, if you're sick, what's number one thing you're not going to do? They even knew in pre-scientific times that the way to spread disease is that the touching and the interaction. The
Mhm.
fact that she was willing to expose Jesus to us, it shows that she's almost on the cusp of not being able to deal with the situation, and she wants to share that impurity, which again, the impurity could be solved for a man. Just wait till night and maybe you go to a ritual aram to a mikvah. It's not like a super big deal. But I think that she's actually trying to share her pain with him by the blood. And then what's his answer? His answer is simple.
You
The,
just your
the whole
faith.
process that you're going through was a little unnecessary. The main thing that I'm trying to preach is a messianic time. I'm trying to preach there's a Messiah, there's a person who's coming to act a little differently. And your attitude for the people who are unseen, they're not going to be unseen anymore. Just because you had to live an invisible lifestyle, you are healed. You can now jump back. So I think when he's telling her to jump back, it's a little bit of a metaphor. It's saying that your invisibleness, that you thought the only way to be seen was by sharing this impurity, now you could share your purity. You could share the fact that you're perfectly clean. Okay. So, any questions, points on that?
Yeah, no. So I didn't realize the fact like until you highlighted this that she knew that by touching Jesus she will make him impure, and she still went ahead and touched him, even though she knew that will make him impure based on based on Leviticus, right? And so, but also Jesus' response of you don't have to do all that. This your act of faith changes all that. That's very profound as well. And we'll have to think about this a bit, right? So when he means faith, right, it's not just a mental cognitive thinking, believing that he's there, but also a physical action that has been, or a physical action that's been carried out as a result of that thinking. Or like she didn't blindly just touch him as in, it's not like, it's not like if I touch him, something will happen, but more as in she had the faith, with that faith when she touched him, that caused her, that led her to her healing.
Well, again, I'm not saying exactly that, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I
I don't
want to
know.
throw out, because I know we have limited time, I just want to throw out one additional idea. So I said it was accurate what I said to the haima, having a flux of blood, only shows up in Matthew right here. But with the word haima, or ema, blood shows up many times. Obviously, you would probably be annoyed as a Christian if the word blood didn't show up regularly, considering the importance that Christianity places on Jesus' blood and blood ritual in general. So I just want to point out also in Matthew in 16:17, we have the verse, I think it's a famous verse, from my perspective, for sure. And it says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood, haima, did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven." So we see in that situation where flesh and blood is a metaphor or a symbol of humanhood, of being normal, of how society should run. Flesh and blood would not be able to reveal this to you, Simon, son of Jonah. However, my Father in heaven would be able to reveal it for you. So we see in this that blood is a metaphor for humanness, and the flesh and bloodness is something that will be something that's hidden from you. And it could be we could see that this woman who had a blood disease, if we see her fully as a metaphor, that her bloodness, her humanness was killing her. The fact that she was inundated with a flesh and blood lifestyle, such that she was so physical, so human, that the blood was flowing out of her. She was so concretely lost in the physical world, and therefore only once she was able to kind of, like as we see in Matthew 16, 17, to be saved by the Father in heaven, that she able to overcome that physicality, overcome that flesh and bloodness, overcome that humanness. And inherently, the second she overcomes that attitude, the blood stops. Because the blood was a symbol, a sign of the physical limitations of mankind. And one of the things that Jesus is always trying to teach is that those limitations are not real. If only you trust in your Father in heaven, you're able to free yourselves of that. So it could be the second that she realized that the blood, which is a symbol of flesh and bloodness, of humanhood, of physicality, of a lacking of understanding of the kingdom of heaven, then by definition she had to stop bleeding. It was almost like mechanical. If you just had the faith, you're not going to bleed anymore because that blood was a symbol of physicality and a lack of understanding of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, that's that. I think that's lost to think about. Where I think the way I can see that his way of thinking would have been so could have been subversive, right? I think at least even for me right now, it takes me a little bit. It does, uh, at least the way you framed it, it stretches my imagination. It stretches my way of thinking. So I can only imagine how this would have come across to her, as in. Like would any of this even landed on her, like, or would have just gone like right over her head, like
Well,
she's.
I would say that when we look at the apostles, we could ask, forget about her. We could ask the question of the apostles. The apostles, it seems, would be the highest, would have the highest comprehension, the highest understanding of what Jesus is trying to do. And we see that they regularly fail in that mission. So I think this is one of the complications that, as a Christian, you might have to struggle with. That if you have a figure, again, like, and this is something I think you might struggle with today. If you have a messianic figure that could be denied that he was the Messiah, is that good enough for you?
Hmm.
So when you look today, I think the Christians today who look back say Jesus is 2,000 years ago, and we still seem to be living in a world of terrorism, poverty, craziness, and you could say that's an opportunity for us to reach out to the meek, and to offer, loving kindness. Or you might say that's a defeater for the belief that Jesus is Messiah, because the world's not good enough now. So I don't think that's a question for her. It's maybe a question for you, Isaac. How much does Jesus have to accomplish to make it that it's reasonable or fair that you should believe in him?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is I don't have a great answer to your
No, you don't
question.
have to. I'm saying, but like, I don't think it's fair to ask of this woman who on the spot is dealing with sickness,
Hmm.
what was the evidential threshold for
Hmm.
her to go from not believing to believing, from unwell to well? Like, these things are very complicated on the spot. We've had 2,000 years to ponder it and to contemplate it. And, we're in a different position. But her, I would say that if he just did the miracle, if he just healed her, let it be a metaphor, not a metaphor, then that would be good enough. I think like, historically, even the Bible, we talk about this, what happens a false prophet is doing miracles. So there is a sense that, there's a David Copperfield element that some people could just do miracles or fool you, or maybe what if someone like Bilam, son of Peor, what if someone is able to do magic or miracles and it tells you to not do the things that you believe are true? So, should the person's actions be evidence enough for you to alter your belief system, or should your belief system be strong enough to repel these questions of your faith? Good question. I ask this to Jews sometimes, and maybe this will help you. Like, what would it take? Like, we have some people, like, I don't talk to Christians about faith as much, but we have Jews who believe with blind faith or with rational faith or with evidential faith. And I say to them, what would be like the straw that breaks the camel's back? Like, what would be the thing that would say, like, well, if I have a reason for believing, what would it take to not believe? Or what would it take to, what would be too much? And some people just say nothing because my faith is too strong. But especially rationalists or people who lack the religion as part of their identity, or especially what about people who kind of are evangelicized and they jump into religion. So we saw there was enough evidence to jump in, even if it's like irrational or rational. So what does the evidence jump out? So this is a question that you can ask this woman who is healed after 12 years of ailment. Like,
Hmm.
what was the point that put you over the hump? So I don't know the answer to that. Okay, Isaac, on that note, we'll call it a day.
Well, Rabbi, on that note, it's lots to think and reflect. Thank you.
Okay, have a great day.